Fire of war, the great confrontation, on a moonless black night, where the sea was calm as if anticipating the storm, the first missiles were launched, tearing the sky into pieces of fire. The sound of explosions was enough to wake the entire world. This was the beginning of a war with no return, a war that would change the face of the earth forever. Chapter 1, the first spark in the South China Sea. Tensions were at their peak. Warships prowled through disputed waters amid increasing Chinese warnings. Reconnaissance planes patrolled the skies, radars operated at full capacity, and commanders sat in operations rooms, watching screens, all knowing that the pressure had reached its breaking point. Then, disaster struck. China fired a warning missile over an American destroyer, but the response was not just a warning, it was a devastating strike targeting a Chinese naval base. The flames erupted, and there was no turning back. Chapter 2, the blaze unleashed. All units, prepare for attack. We will take the war to enemy territory. This was not a threat, it was a direct order from the high command. Within hours, squadrons of fighter jets launched from American aircraft carriers, tearing through the sky like a storm, while Chinese forces swiftly moved toward strategic points in the Pacific. In Taiwan, fierce battles erupted. Special forces clashed in narrow alleyways, grenades exploded, bullets tore through walls. Warships exchanged heavy fire, sending shards of metal flying through the air, and the waters burned as if a dragon was breathing fire in every direction. Chapter 3, the sky ablaze. There was no place to hide in the sky. Swarms of American F-35s and Chinese J-20s engaged in intense dogfights, missiles streaking in all directions. Some planes exploded before their pilots could even register the threat. In one thrilling moment, an American pilot performed an impossible maneuver, diving at high speed before pulling up sharply to launch a missile that struck a Chinese fighter on his tail. But his victory was short-lived. His aircraft was hit by debris from the explosion, forcing him to eject. As he descended with his parachute, he watched below as a city burned under relentless bombardment. Chapter 4, urban warfare. In the streets of Hong Kong and Shanghai, the battles turned into ruthless street fighting. American special forces rappelled from helicopters onto rooftops, while Chinese troops used tunnels and ruined buildings as defensive strongholds. The scene was horrifying. Buildings collapsed, cars burned, snipers took positions in towers, and explosions never ceased. In a decisive moment, a Chinese soldier dashed into the open street, firing an anti-tank rocket at an American tank, turning it into a ball of fire. But before he could celebrate, a sniper's bullet found him, and he collapsed, a mere shadow in this raging inferno. Chapter 5, the turning point. In Washington and Beijing, screens displayed casualty numbers, devastated cities, and collapsing economies. The world watched in silence as military leaders debated the most terrifying scenario, nuclear escalation. But before madness reached its peak, the unexpected happened. A malfunction in a defense system triggered the launch of a tactical nuclear missile from an unidentified submarine. Alarms blared, anti-missile defenses scrambled to intercept. But would they succeed? Was this the end of the war or the end of the world? Chapter 6, alliances crumble. When war intensifies, friends disappear, only interests dictate the fate of nations. As the fighting escalated, it was no longer just the U.S. and China in the conflict. Allied nations intervened, but every alliance trembled under the weight of mounting losses. In Europe, protests erupted, demanding an end to the war. In Moscow, the Russian Security Council convened an emergency session as the Kremlin pondered how to turn the situation to its advantage. In the Middle East, side conflicts flared, turning the entire world into an extended battlefield. Chapter 7, the ultimate weapon. In traditional wars, power wins. But in the wars of the future, technology dictates the fate of the world. In a secret military base, a team of American scientists worked on developing an electromagnetic bomb capable of disabling all electronics within hundreds of miles. But China was not far behind in this technological race, having launched satellites equipped with laser weapons, capable of targeting aircraft from space. When the electromagnetic bomb was deployed over the South China Sea, dozens of warships from both sides plunged into total darkness. Navigation systems failed, aircraft fell from the sky, and soldiers ran in all directions, unable to communicate with their commanders. But what no one expected, was that this weapon might push the war completely out of control. Chapter 8, the deadly response. China had only one option left, total retaliation. Chinese nuclear submarines secretly approached the California coast and launched the first missile strike on U. bases. The ground shook under the force of the explosions, flames rising high into the sky. In response, the U. deployed its AI-powered drone fleet, launching precision strikes on Chinese weapons factories, crippling supply lines. In Beijing, U. forces stormed a secret research facility developing a biological weapon, only to find themselves trapped. A brutal firefight ensued, while dangerous chemicals began leaking from the labs, threatening an unforeseen catastrophe. Chapter 9, The Inevitable End. With rising death tolls and global economic collapse, secret negotiations began between both sides. But time was running out. In Washington, the National Security Council gathered in an underground war room. In Beijing, the Chinese president met with his generals. Everyone stared at maps filled with nothing but ruins. Then came the moment everyone feared. An unidentified submarine launched a ballistic missile toward a major capital. Alarms rang out, missile defenses scrambled. Was this the strike that would ignite total annihilation? Chapter 10, Silence after the storm. At the last moment, the missiles stopped. But the world was no longer the same. Cities lay in ruins, nations were exhausted, and survivors were mere shadows searching for the meaning of a peace that no longer existed. At the end of every war, there are no heroes, only stories to be told, and scars that last forever.